It was a Tuesday evening in March, the kind of quiet night in Raleigh when the air felt heavy with spring rain. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and when I saw Daniel's name on the screen, I smiled without hesitation. My only son, 35 years old, the boy I had raised on my own since his father died, was finally getting married. I had been waiting for this call, hoping he wanted to discuss the details of his wedding. Maybe he wanted to know what dress I planned to wear. Or perhaps he wanted to hear about the lemon cake recipe he always loved, the one I thought might be nice to bring for the reception. But the moment I answered, the warmth drained from my chest. "Mom," Daniel's voice was clipped, rehearsed. "We need to talk about the wedding." I chuckled softly, trying to ease his nerves. "Of course. Honey, I've already picked out a dress. Nothing too flashy navy blue. Simple, elegant. You'll be proud." "That's the problem," he interrupted, and I could hear the tension sharpen in his throat. "Claire and we don't think it's a good idea for you to come." For a moment, I thought I misheard. "What do you mean?" The silence stretched long enough for me to glance at the phone, certain the line had gone dead. Finally, he exhaled, a sound heavy with discomfort. "You don't fit the aesthetic we're going for. Claire's family is very image-conscious. Her father is paying for everything, and the photographs have to be perfect. You've aged. Mom, you're not very photogenic anymore. It would be better if you just sat this one out." The words didn't just sting, they hollowed me out. Me, the mother who had carried him for 9 months, who had walked miles to save on bus fare, who had skipped meals so he could eat better, now reduced to a flaw in a photograph. "I am your mother," I whispered, my voice smaller than I intended. "I know," he said quickly, almost apologetically, "and I love you for everything you've done. But this is about my future with Claire. We've been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider long-term care options. There's a wonderful retirement facility." I nearly dropped the phone. "A nursing home?" "Daniel, I am 67. I walk every morning. I drive myself anywhere I need to go. My mind is clear." "You're being dramatic. It's not like that. But you can't live independently forever. Claire and I are starting a family. We won't have time to keep checking on you." It was as if my life, 35 years of sacrifice, had been summarized into a single inconvenience. He spoke of me like I was luggage he didn't know where to store. I hung up without saying goodbye. The phone trembled in my hand as I looked around my kitchen, the modest home I'd bought with decades of careful work. The garden I'd planted. The photographs of Daniel lining the refrigerator. His first day of school. His graduation. His smile on every birthday. In every one, I was beside him, radiant with pride. And now, in his perfect new life, I was too ugly to exist. That night, sleep would not come. I tossed beneath the quilt I had stitched myself years ago, staring at the ceiling as Daniel's words repeated in my mind. Not photogenic anymore. Too old. Too ugly. The phrases echoed like thunder in a hollow house. When the clock read past midnight, I rose quietly and padded across the creaking hardwood floor to my bedroom dresser. From the bottom drawer, beneath sweaters I rarely wore, I pulled out a weathered box. Inside were folders, manila envelopes, and neatly clipped documents. They smelled faintly of ink and time, of the life I had built in silence. Most people saw me as what Daniel saw, a tired woman living modestly on a pension from decades of being a school principal. They saw a 10-year-old sedan parked in the driveway, my coupon-filled wallet, my thrift store clothes. They never looked deeper. But beneath that surface, every dollar I saved had been a brick in a fortress I was quietly constructing. The first deed was for a duplex I had bought 15 years ago, just after Daniel graduated from college. The seller, desperate from divorce. Needed quick cash. I had offered what little I had, adding to it the small inheritance from my parents. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I rented both units, and those rent checks covered the mortgage until the property grew in value. Next came a small strip of commercial offices in East Raleigh, a tax consultant, a boutique salon, and a sandwich shop rented the units. Boring businesses, dependable tenants. Every month their payments rolled in, feeding my savings account while I lived frugally. The boldest purchase was an apartment building near downtown, in a neighborhood people once called dangerous. I had trusted my instincts, seen the city's plans for revitalization, and took the leap. Now, that building was worth nearly double what I paid. I laid the papers across the kitchen table like puzzle pieces. Together, those properties were worth nearly $1.2 million. But that was only the foundation. For 20 years, I had also invested in low-cost index funds, steady, unglamorous, but powerful in their quiet growth. The portfolio now stood at $800,000. My checking account, the one Daniel thought carried scraps from Social Security, actually held over $120. 000. My savings account added another $200. 000. I had also paid premiums on 2 life insurance policies, totaling $500,000 in benefits. All told, I was worth just over $2.4 million. I touched the documents gently, like old friends. I hadn't built this wealth from greed, but from fear. Fear of being helpless. Fear of burdening Daniel. Fear of being forgotten in some government facility. Ironically, the independence I worked so hard to secure was the very thing Daniel and Claire now wanted to take away from me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the empire I had built in silence. To Daniel, I was an old woman with gray hair and laugh lines. To myself, I was a strategist, a survivor, a woman with power. For the first time in years, I began to smile. By dawn, the decision had begun to take shape. I made a pot of black coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my empire spread out before me, and stared at the will I had signed 5 years earlier. My trembling fingers traced the words, "I leave my entire estate to my beloved son, Daniel Lawson." Beloved. Once, that word had been true. I had believed that every sacrifice, every skipped meal, every second job, every lonely night was proof of a love that would eventually be honored. But now, staring at the paper, the word looked naive. Worse than naive. It looked like weakness. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had stored for years but never dared to use. Whitmore and Associates. How may I help you? This is Margaret Lawson, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Kreis. Whitmore, it's urgent. I want to revise my will. There was a pause. Then the secretary replied, he has an opening Thursday at 2. 2 days. Enough time to decide not just what to erase, but where to redirect the life I had built. That evening, I pulled out a brochure I had tucked away years ago, the Southern Women's Opportunity Trust. They provided scholarships and safe housing for women trying to rebuild after abuse or loss. Women who reminded me of myself, the me who once stood terrified at 29 with a child on my hip and no husband to lean on. I had sent them small donations over the years. Nothing that could change their world. But now I could change hundreds of lives. For a moment, guilt pricked my chest, cutting Daniel out entirely, stripping him of what I had always intended for him. Was it too cruel? But then his words replayed. You've aged. Mom, you're not photogenic. Maybe it's time for long-term care. No. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. The next day, I called my oldest friend, Evelyn, who had known me since we were teachers together. When I told her what Daniel had said, The silence on the other end was long and heavy. Finally, she exhaled. "Margaret, I love you, but I am not surprised. That boy has been taking advantage of your devotion for years. Maybe this is the wake-up call you needed." Her words were sharp, but they hit the truth. I had been living as if Daniel's love was guaranteed, no matter how little he gave back. But love without respect is not love at all. That night, I wrote the first draft of my letter to him. I wrote about the sacrifices, the hidden investments, the choices I made to protect both of us, and then, with a hand that no longer shook, I wrote the sentence that sealed it. "You have lost more than money, Daniel. You have lost me." The morning of Daniel's wedding arrived with a kind of cruel brightness. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the navy dress I had laid out the night before. It was simple, elegant, chosen not to compete with the bride, but to honor myself. For the first time in years, I had gone to a salon. A young stylist named Lila had worked miracles with my gray hair, shaping it into something polished and soft. "You look beautiful," she had said with sincerity, and for a fleeting moment, I almost believed her. I slipped the letter into a cream-colored envelope and tucked it into my purse. Alongside it, I placed a small silver picture frame I had bought from a shop in downtown Raleigh. That would be my visible gift, harmless and polite. The envelope, however, was the true gift, the detonator waiting to unravel Daniel's perfect world. By 9 o'clock, a taxi arrived to take me to the church. Driving myself felt wrong today. This wasn't a family duty anymore. It was a performance, and I was both actress and audience. The church was breathtaking, an old stone building with stained glass windows that cast kaleidoscopes of color onto the aisle. Every pew was lined with roses and white silk ribbon. Claire's family had spared no expense. I slipped into the very last row, the place Daniel would have chosen for me if had known I dared to show up. Guests filled the sanctuary, whispering compliments, adjusting their suits and dresses, each of them part of the flawless tableau Claire's family wanted. I recognized a few faces: Daniel's college roommate, his first supervisor, even our old neighbor from the house where Daniel grew up. Some waved at me, confusion flickering across their expressions. Why was I not in the front row, where the mother of the groom belonged? I only smiled faintly, offering no explanation. The music began, and the congregation rose. Claire appeared at the back of the aisle, radiant in lace and silk, moving with the confidence of someone who had always been told she deserved everything she desired. She was stunning. Yes, but my eyes locked on Daniel. He stood at the altar, glowing with anticipation, looking like a man who believed he had finally arranged his life to perfection. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and promises. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, applause erupted. Daniel and Claire walked arm in arm down the aisle, smiles dazzling, futures bright. For a moment, his gaze swept the back rows, and his eyes landed on me. His expression flickered shock, embarrassment, then dismissal as if I were a ghost he had hoped not to see. At the reception line, I waited until nearly everyone had gone before approaching. I handed Claire the silver frame, her smile polite and stiff. Then, as I leaned in to embrace Daniel, I slipped the envelope into the pocket of his tuxedo. "I am proud of you," I whispered, and I meant it. Proud of what he had become, even if he had forgotten who made him possible. And then I walked away, leaving the envelope to burn against his chest like a silent fuse. I left the reception hall before the music swelled and the toasts began. Outside, the air smelled of roses and champagne, but I breathed it like someone walking away from a battlefield. My taxi pulled away from the church, and I knew that while I was heading toward silence, Daniel's night was only just beginning to crumble. It didn't take long. At 7:15, my phone lit up with his number. I let it ring. A voicemail followed. His tone casual, almost mocking. Mom, I found your little envelope. Funny joke. Call me back so we can talk like adults. A joke. That was his first instinct to dismiss it. By 8:45, another message came. His voice thinner, strained. Mom, I called Whitmore's office. They confirmed you're his client, but they won't tell me anything until Monday. What the hell is going on? At 11:30, desperation bled into fury. 2.4 million? Are you insane? Where did you even get that money? You've been lying to me, lying my whole life. I poured myself a glass of wine and listened with an odd calm. The son who had told me I was too ugly for his wedding now screamed into my voicemail, shocked that his invisible mother had more wealth than he could dream of. By 2:15 in the morning, his voice cracked with panic. Claire's father knows. Someone saw me reading the letter. Now everyone knows. They think you came here to humiliate us. Claire's locked herself in the bathroom. She won't even look at me. What have you done? What had I done? Nothing more than reveal the truth. Truth was its own kind of bomb, and I had simply lit the fuse. At 7:45 the next morning, the last message came. His voice was hoarse, almost pleading. I am coming over. We're going to fix this. Whatever's wrong with you, whatever I did, we can work it out. You can't just destroy my life because you're angry. Angry? No. This wasn't anger. This was liberation. As the messages piled up, whispers spread like wildfire through Raleigh. Someone at the wedding had spilled the story. The groom's mother, too ugly for the front row, had slipped him a letter revealing a secret fortune and a will that cut him out completely. By Sunday morning, it wasn't just a family scandal. It was public humiliation. Claire's family, so obsessed with image, now faced questions from their guests. Rumors of annulment buzzed through the city like hornets. And I, sitting in my modest kitchen with my coffee cooling in front of me, knew the storm I had unleashed was only beginning. Daniel thought he could erase me from his perfect picture. Instead, I had become the shadow across every photograph. The knock came at 9:15 on Sunday morning, loud enough to rattle the glass panes in my front door. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Still, I checked. Daniel stood on my porch in the same tuxedo pants and wrinkled white shirt from the night before. His bow tie hung loose around his neck, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. He looked less like a groom and more like a man who had survived a wreck. I opened the door slowly. Good morning, Daniel. He brushed past me without waiting for an invitation, pacing the living room like a caged animal. What have you done? He demanded. Voice sharp, broken. I closed the door quietly and leaned against it. You'll have to be more specific. My wedding is ruined. Claire won't speak to me. Her father says he's reconsidering everything. Everyone knows about the letter, about your money, about cutting me out. Why would you do this? His words spilled out like a child's tantrum, but beneath them was fear raw, choking fear. I walked past him, sat down in my armchair, the same place where I had once rocked him to sleep. Why? I repeated softly. Because you told me I was too ugly to sit in your front row. Because you and your bride plotted to put me in a home. Because after 35 years of sacrifice, you made it clear I was no longer a person to you, only a problem to manage. He froze, as if the truth struck harder than any slap. That's not fair, he said weakly. Fair? I laughed bitterly. Was it fair when I worked double shifts so you could attend summer programs? Was it fair when I drained my savings so you could finish graduate school? Was it fair when I handed you the down payment for your first house, while I drove a car that barely started? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing again. I was trying to keep the peace. Claire's family is different. They care about appearances. I just wanted the day to go smoothly. You wanted smoothness, Daniel, not family. You wanted a picture-perfect life, even if it meant cutting out the woman who made you possible. His voice cracked. I love you, Mom. You know I do. No, I said firmly. Standing, you love the idea of me. The mother who gave without asking. The mother who erased herself so you could shine. That woman is gone. From the kitchen doorway, Evelyn's voice broke the silence. She had let herself in with the spare key I gave her years ago. She's right. Daniel, I've watched your mother sacrifice everything for you, and you repaid her with cruelty. Daniel turned, eyes wide, caught between shame and rage. Stay out of this. No, Evelyn said calmly. This is between a woman and the son who abandoned her long before she walked into that church yesterday. Daniel slumped onto the couch, his head in his hands. Then tell me how to fix it. Please. I'll do anything. I shook my head. Some things can't be fixed. Daniel, you can't undo years of neglect with one desperate plea. His shoulders shook. For the first time since he was a boy, my son wept in front of me, and I finally felt no urge to comfort him. Daniel stayed on my couch until nearly noon, alternating between begging and raging, but nothing he said moved me. At last, he stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat in the silence that followed, my heart steady for the first time in decades. By Tuesday morning, the realtor's sign was planted in my yard. By Wednesday, I had closed my local bank accounts, transferring every cent to new accounts overseas. On Thursday, Evelyn and I boarded a plane to Lisbon. We didn't tell a soul. I had prepared everything in advance, a legal name change to Margaret Hale Hale. After my grandmother and a new passport, I had already spoken to doctors in Portugal, arranging to begin treatment for early-stage breast cancer discovered during a routine exam. The diagnosis was frightening. Yes, but also gave me the perfect cover for vanishing. As far as Raleigh would know, I was receiving care abroad. Then, a few months later, the news spread. Margaret Lawson had died in Europe after a brief illness. There was no body, no memorial, just a simple obituary drafted from the words I left with my lawyer. Daniel arranged a grand funeral in Raleigh, filled with white roses and polished eulogies. Guests whispered about the tragedy of a mother dying alone overseas. He stood at the pulpit and spoke of me as if he had cherished me all his life. But I wasn't in a casket. I was sitting at a cafe terrace in Porto, sipping strong coffee, while the Douro River shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Daniel had lost me, and the world believed I was gone. Meanwhile, the Southern Women's Opportunity Trust announced the largest donation in its history, $2.4 million from an anonymous benefactor. Articles spread across local papers. Local woman leaves fortune to support women in need. My lawyer had carried out every instruction to the letter. The irony was delicious. Daniel, the man who had dismissed me as a burden, now watched as my name became synonymous with generosity and vision. Stripped of inheritance, stripped of the illusion of control, he faced whispers from every corner of Raleigh. His bride's family, so obsessed with prestige, no longer saw him as a prize, but as a humiliation. And I was free. Evelyn and I rented a sunlit apartment overlooking tiled rooftops, a place filled with music and laughter. I painted for the first time in my life. She learned Portuguese. Together, we lived not as women discarded, but as women reborn. Daniel thought burying me in shame would be simple. Instead, he buried himself in the shadow of the truth I left behind. 8 months passed before I truly believed my new life was real. The first months were filled with medical treatments, chemo, exhaustion, quiet mornings where Evelyn sat by my side. reading aloud when I was too tired to keep my eyes open. I survived. And when the doctor finally smiled and said, "You are clear," I felt as though I had been given not just health, but rebirth. Evelyn and I celebrated with a bottle of wine on our balcony, the river glowing beneath the moon. "To new beginnings," she said, lifting her glass. "To the women we buried so we could finally live," I replied. We laughed, but there were tears too. Tears for the years we had lost, for the parts of ourselves we had buried under duty and silence. Life in Portugal became everything I never dared to imagine. We traveled to Spain, then Italy, wandering cobbled streets, tasting food that lingered like poetry on the tongue. I painted landscapes that looked nothing like Raleigh. And for the first time, I painted not for someone else, but for me. Evelyn teased that I had talent. And maybe I did. But what mattered was that I had joy. Back in North Carolina, news filtered through in whispers. Articles praised the Southern Women's Opportunity Trust, which was expanding its housing program, opening new doors for women who had been trapped and voiceless. Hundreds of lives were changing, and they didn't even know the name of the woman who had made it possible. Daniel, meanwhile, carried his loss like a wound. Evelyn showed me a newspaper clipping she had stumbled across online. His marriage had faltered. His in-laws had distanced themselves. He was left with only stories, forced to explain how the mother he had discarded turned out to be wealthier than any of them. And every time he spoke my name, he was forced to reckon with the truth he had tried to erase. One evening, Evelyn asked, "Do you ever regret it, leaving him with nothing?" I thought for a long while, staring at the twilight over the rooftops. I regret that I gave so much of myself to someone who didn't value it. But no, I don't regret choosing myself at last. He made his choices, and I made mine. I leaned back, the warm wind brushing my face, and whispered the lesson that had taken me 67 years to learn. Love is not proven by how much you sacrifice. Love is proven by how much respect survives. And respect, once lost, can never be bought back, not with flowers, not with apologies, not even with millions of dollars. I had lost a son, but I had found myself, and that was the truest inheritance of all. I used to believe being a mother meant giving until there was nothing left of me. I thought sacrifice was love, and silence was loyalty. But I learned too late that love without respect is just a slow kind of death. When my son told me I was too ugly for his perfect life, I finally understood I had spent decades building a foundation not just for him, but for myself. Choosing to walk away was the hardest and bravest thing I have ever done. In Portugal, with Evelyn by my side and the sun warming my face, I discovered that it is never too late to begin again. Respect must be earned, not demanded. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let go of those who refuse to value you. Now I want to ask you, what lesson do you take from this story, and where are you watching from?